Hello, my name is Jared Taylor. I'm the editor of American Renaissance, and I'd like to speak to you today about the reality of race. It's become quite fashionable to claim that race is nothing more than a social construct with no basis at all in biology. Craig Venter, who became famous for sequencing the human genome, he claims that, quote, the concept of race has no genetic or scientific basis. Right now, in the fall of 2011, at the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., there's an exhibit called Race. Are we so different? It claims to, quote, question the very concept of race. Now, common sense tells us this is just silly. No one would ever mistake a Scandinavian for an Australian Aborigine. And it's impossible for two Scandinavians to give birth to an Aborigine. As it turns out, science agrees. Science tells us this is silly too. Science tells us that race is an important biological category. First though, let's consider some of the arguments of the people who claim race has little or no scientific basis. One thing they do is to point out that there is more genetic variation within a race, within races, than between them. Harvard geneticist Richard Lewontin, he pointed out in 1972 that 85% of the human genetic variation is found within any given race. And racial differences account for just 15% of genetic variation. Professor Lewontin, therefore, his conclusion was the very concept of race is destructive and should be abolished. Now, it turns out the 85%, 15% figures are true, but that 15% between races is very important. Consider the differences between the sexes. What you see on the screen are the 46 chromosomes that make up the human genome. Do you see that stumpy little chromosome in the lower right-hand corner of your screen? That's the Y chromosome. Men have it, women don't. Otherwise, men and women are genetically identical. That is a very small genetic difference. But look at the physical differences between the sexes. Some are absolute. Women have organs men don't, and vice versa. And other differences are like the differences Lewontin pointed out between the races. Height, for example, that's controlled almost entirely by genes, and we know that men, on average, are taller than women. However, the range of heights from men, from the smallest guy to the tallest guy, that's much greater than the difference between the average man and average woman's height. So there is greater variation within the sexes than between them. But that doesn't make the sex difference in average height go away. Anyone who claims race is an illusion, he would logically have to say that dog breeds are an illusion too. 27% of the total genetic variation in dogs is between breeds. Okay, that's more than the 15%, which is the variation between human races. But it is still correct to say that there is more genetic variation within dog breeds than between dog breeds. Again, that doesn't mean breeds are an illusion. And look at the tremendous differences that result from that 27%. Dogs can be strikingly different in appearance, temperament, lifespan, susceptibility to disease. Differences in dog breeds, they are really, you can think of them as extreme versions of the human racial differences. What we're talking about is 27% of genetic variation as opposed to 15%. Another argument for people who think race is some kind of sociological illusion is that races gradually merge into each other at the borders. They claim somehow this means race doesn't even exist. But that's like claiming that the colors blue and green don't exist, because if you look at them on a color spectrum, they do gradually merge into each other. Yeah, they merge, but blue and green are different and distinct colors. As it turns out, races sometimes do gradually merge from one to another within a continent, but between continents there are clear racial breaks. In any case, The existence of mixed race populations along the borders of populations doesn't negate the reality of race, it affirms it. Mixed race people exist only because race exists. Also, if race is not a biological reality, how come you can determine somebody's race from just a few little snippets of DNA or just from skull shape? There was a 2005 study led by Dr. Neil Risch, and it was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. Risch looked at the DNA of 3,636 people who identified themselves as either white, black, East Asian, or Hispanic. The analysis, which again looked at just a tiny part of the human genome, it identified the subject's race with 99.9% accuracy. Actually, it was 100% accuracy, because where the DNA differed from a subject's racial classification of himself, say somebody thought he was black, but it actually turned out he was more Hispanic than black, that was because these people had ancestors they didn't know about. The DNA does not lie. By the way, this study could tell Japanese and Chinese apart with 99% accuracy, just by sampling a little bit of each person's genome. Can you tell Japanese and Chinese just by looking at them? The shape of your skull gives your race away. Dr. Stephen Owsley and his colleagues, they could tell black skulls from white skulls 80% of the time using just 2 variables. With 19 variables, they got it right 97% of the time. Forensic anthropologist Norman Sawin, he got so fed up with people denying the reality of race that he wrote an article with the title, "If Races Do Not Exist, Why Are Forensic Anthropologists So Good at Identifying Them?" Good question. Racial differences go well beyond skin color and bone structure. The races differ in hormone levels, gestation time, rate of development, brain size, eye size, genital size. They differ in hair type, bone density, fat distribution, age of puberty onset. They differ in lifespan, twinning rates, myopia rates, disease rates. It goes on and on. And these are biological facts. They're not sociological constructs. As Ernest Meyer of Harvard pointed out in 2002, quote, "Those who subscribe to the opinion that there are no human races are obviously ignorant of modern biology." Doctors have to know that race is real. The FDA has approved a heart failure drug called Bidil, but only for blacks. And it's because blacks do not benefit from conventional heart failure drugs. Sickle cell anemia is a condition found almost exclusively in blacks. About 1 in 4 West Africans carry the gene for it, but almost no whites do. According to Dr. Steve Jones of University College London, any whites who carry the gene probably have an African ancestor that Grandpa never told him about. 8 to 10% of Northern Europeans have a genetic disorder called hemochromatosis. It is almost non-existent in any other racial group. There are sharp racial differences in rates at which people get food allergies, prostate cancer, breast cancer, diabetes, and in every one of those cases, the differences are caused at least in part by genetic differences. It's because of medical differences like these that there are even diagnostic tests that are tailored to specific races. So in some cases, it would be outright malpractice for a doctor to pretend that race was an illusion. It should be clear to you by now that your instinctive understanding of race is correct. Race is real. It took hundreds of thousands of years of separation for groups to become as unlike each other as, say, African Bushmen and Ukrainians. The idea that race is an illusion or a sociological construct, it's absurd on its face. Only white people seem to be able to trick themselves into believing it. You almost never hear blacks or Asians jabbering about how race is an illusion. They know very well race is real. And even the goofiest white people suddenly understand race just fine if it's a question of granting racial preferences to non-whites. Well, why do people push this crazy race is an illusion scheme? I think its purpose is to persuade people, white people anyway, that immigration means nothing. If Europeans and white Americans are being replaced by Mexicans and Arabs, who cares? We're just being replaced by ourselves. Likewise, if whites marry Africans or Haitians, who cares? There's no such thing as race. So that's just like marrying white people. Wrong. Grievously wrong. Suicidally wrong. And in another video, I'll tell you why. Thank you for your attention.